The restaurant industry in San Francisco is known all around the world, not only for incredibly creative cuisine, but just, of course, as one of the backbones of our small business community. So to hear how that community has been impacted, we have with us today Laurie Thomas, Executive Director of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association. Laurie, welcome to The Great Pause.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Now, I understand that in addition to being a restaurant owner yourself, you have two. You've been on the board of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association for over a decade, but you stepped into this new role as executive director. Well, your timing was either really good or really a challenge. January, just before all this struck.
Yeah, it's been quite the roller coaster ride. I'm happy I could be here at this time because I think the combination of having the business owner, restaurant owner experience combined with my interest for many years in public policy has enabled us to sort of be able to try to add value and help both our members and work with the city on trying to see what we can do to help provide relief.
Right. So let's get to the numbers right away. How many restaurants are there in San Francisco, and how many of them are members of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, which is itself a nonprofit service organization, correct?
Correct. It's a trade organization. It's a 501c6. Yeah. So the numbers are moving around as you could expect. At the end of 2019, by the number of permits, now I'm talking about brick and mortar restaurants here. That doesn't include like mobile food trucks or commissaries. Brick and mortar restaurants in 2019 were about 3,900 per the permits. I am sitting on the San Francisco Recovery Task Force, and the numbers we saw a couple of weeks ago from the chief economist, he thought the numbers were closer to 3,654 restaurants. So there could have been a little bit of a drop off in the first part of the year. So it's somewhere in that range, 3,600 to 3,900. And we represent, I wish we represented more, and hopefully we will after all of this if everybody can survive. We represent probably about 800 restaurants. But again, we've opened up the membership, we've opened up the Facebook, we're just trying to communicate and work with anybody who needs it.
Right. So just this morning, I was on a Zoom call, a virtual meeting with the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce Executive Committee, on which I sit. And earlier, I was on a public relations call with San Francisco Travel. And later this afternoon, I'll be on a call with the Hotel Council. These are all groups like you that are working to get us through from the Great Pause into the Great Recovery. All three of those calls I mentioned were very sobering. Let's talk about the numbers. How many restaurants have already closed in San Francisco, and what do you think is going to be the ultimate fallout of this once we get into being open actually for business?
So, I wish we had more accurate numbers. We just did a poll. We're working on the results now. It's hard to even get, everybody to respond. I'm concerned that we probably have a closure rate of around 20 to 30%. Somewhere in there based on some numbers I've seen. I keep hearing from people who closed their businesses. Somebody sent me an email last night and told me that they made that decision, unfortunately. So I'm thinking probably 20 to 25%. But again, I can't give you hard numbers on all of that. I think you've heard me say before that I'm very concerned that maybe 50% won't be able to reopen or might reopen and then have to close in a couple of months. I will say that, for those of us that can get some sort of a relief from the government, the probability of staying open is higher, of course. So we will see. We've seen numbers between 30% from the CRA about estimated closures over a month ago. We've also seen the James Beard Foundation show a much higher probability of closures in New York City. Of course, they were struck harder than us. So we will see, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't sort of net out around 50%. But again, it's going to really depend on what happens with the new HOPE Act that Speaker Pelosi is putting forth and with what happens, whether or not people actually get some of the aid that they're still applying for.
Right. So I'm going to ask you now to switch hats. Talk to me as a restaurant owner. You own two restaurants. Are they open?
Yeah.
Are they doing curbside?
No.
Are you going to be able to survive? What is it like for you personally as a restaurant entrepreneur?
Yeah, so we have two small restaurants. One's been around for 23 years, Rosa's Cafe in Cow Hollow, and the other one is Terzo. It's been around for 14 years. Together, they employ about 60 employees, some part-time, of course, not all full-time. On the evening on March 16th, we did not open for dinner service. We laid off, furloughed basically all the staff, paid out all of the accrued San Francisco sick pay, all the vacation, and all of the pay the next day. We've been in contact with them. We just distributed checks from our super generous friends, family, and neighbors for the GoFundMe campaigns to give checks to everybody. And we couldn't really do to-go delivery. It was never really a component of our business. People would order and pick stuff up, but we did very little business to go at either restaurant. The food just doesn't really travel that well. So we just financially couldn't do it. The fixed costs were too high. We would have been bleeding more cash. As it is, I owe vendors, I owe the landlords, and I'm trying to financially figure out what can work. I am waiting for a refund through the employee retention credit. Have not seen that yet. That was supposed to have come by now. It hasn't. So I'm a little concerned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, the goal is to open right now. The goal is to try
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
reopen.
to interrupt. Yeah. So when you do reopen, what is that going to look like physically? How is your restaurant going to look different than it did before COVID hit? And in general, what are other restaurants going to look like?
Yeah, so we don't really know all the answers yet. We're trying to work closely with the folks in the city of San Francisco, much more so than the state. The state put forth, as you saw, Governor Newsom, a lot of guidance that can be used statewide, but we're really looking for take our cues from the city and county of San Francisco on what happens when we reopen. There will be things, of course, like you guys have all heard about, social distancing, whether or not we'll be able to, how many people will be able to seat by running the math. We anticipate that that's going to look like 30 to 40% of capacity, probably closer to 30%, particularly if the bar areas are unable to be seated. That everybody will probably have personal protective equipment on, maybe even the customers, if they're not actually physically eating or drinking. Tablecloths, things that you would normally see preset, won't be able to be preset. People have gloves on. Hopefully we can seat outside. That might help a lot with the capacity of adding, additional covers and getting more revenue. But it's very concerning. We need to be aware of the safety of our guests and the safety of our staff, and we want to still make sure that we can have an open, welcoming experience. And a lot of us are a little concerned how that's going to come down.
Yeah, what are you most concerned about vis-a-vis that the people won't come back, or that they'll come back and feel like, well, boy, this isn't the joyous restaurant space I knew before. This is something entirely different.
I think it's both. I think we unfortunately, I think what we have to do to provide the safety is going to take away from the experience. But we're super adaptable as humans. I think we can adapt to that. I think what we need to be sure is we can be safe. I think the harder question is, can the businesses survive economically? We're not like the federal government. We can't run a deficit. If we don't have cash, we can't make payroll.
Yeah,
that's the biggest problem, I think.
Yeah, we've only got a couple minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to end on an optimistic note, because I know when we started, you said ultimately you're optimistic, and I like to say I'm a pragmatic optimist. What signs of optimism do you see for what's going on now, and what do you think will come? I mean, San Francisco is a vaunted restaurant town. We got to have our restaurants open.
Yeah, well, I will say again what I've been saying before. It's been amazing to meet and work with everybody and develop much closer friendships with everybody across the spectrum, from the city to the private sector and to all of our colleagues in the hospitality industry. So that has been amazing. The restaurant community has really banded together. There's been a lot of coalitions. I've talked to people I have never spoken to before in the past couple of months. So there are a lot of really smart, passionate people that are trying to solve these problems. And I want to say, as long as we keep an open dialogue and we involve the business owners in the discussions with the guidelines to make sure that they're realistic, they're doable, they're enforceable, I hope that we get to a much better outcome. And I think that in the city of San Francisco, we've done a phenomenal job staying ahead of it. And I think everybody's desire is not to see a spike or a regress. So there is,
right,
intelligence and understanding and patience on our side here.
Well, thank you for your leadership. I know, like many, many San Franciscans, I'm looking forward to my first brunch. It's going to be at Catch, my first lunch at Hayes Street Grill, and my first dinner at China Live. And I promise I'll add your restaurants to the list. Just
Yeah,
a
you
few
gotta come to
seconds.
church though, at Rose's Cafe.
I'll be there. Just a few seconds left. What advice would you like to give to your fellow restaurant owners in San Francisco?
I think just stay in touch and communicate and ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There's stuff that you learn every day talking to somebody. You might not know about it. Somebody might have heard about it. That's our goal, is to communicate everything we can and to try to help anybody. So people that need help should ask. There's all of us here trying to help each other, and we'll try to figure it out. We just all need to really try to stay optimistic for our employees' sake, if anything. And I'm still confident we can make it through here.
Great. Thank you so much. Laurie Thomas, Executive Director of San Francisco's Golden Gate Restaurant Association. Back to you, Jen. And I promise you, at least one of those meals that I just mentioned, or at least a drink at the bar, it'll be with you and on me.